Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another episode of The Yakking Show. The Yakking Show brings you business tips, but today we are bringing you a new guest for Harmony, Your Path to Wholeness Health channel. As always, we have interesting guests, and today is certainly no exception. But first, let's introduce co-host Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you. And thank you also very much for tuning into our show. We so appreciate having you. And as Peter mentioned, we do have another special guest with us today. We're very excited to welcome Maja Miller to the show. Now, Maja is a metabolic health coach and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. A fancy way of saying that she uses clinical labs to analyze blood, urine, stool, hair, etc., to figure out why her clients are feeling burnt out, exhausted, and sick. She then uses those results to create tailored bio-individual protocols to reverse their symptoms. So welcome, Maja. How are you today?
Hello, hello, hello. I'm doing awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited.
Oh, let's jump right in, Maja. How does your interpretation of the clinical lab results differ from the approach of conventional medical practitioners?
Oh man, that's a really important question. I love that you're just getting to like the good stuff, right out of the gate. I am not a doctor and I don't diagnose or treat diseases specifically. But what I do is I use labs to kind of figure out generally patterns in the body. And my clients don't really care if we can name it, blame it, and medicate it, as long as we can just kind of get rid of all of the symptoms, right? And so there's a pretty big difference between, I would say, allopathic medicine, the traditional Western model, and the functional medicine model. And the functional medicine model takes a look, if we're to look at like a tree, if the tree all of a sudden, if the leaves were falling off and it's the middle of summer and we look at the soil, we look at the roots, we look at the leaves, we look at the trunk, we look at the bark. Whereas I feel like the Western allopathic model would take a leaf, spray paint it green, and then glue it back up on the tree. And so there's a difference between, I would say, the way that like a functional medicine or a functional nutrition practitioner like myself would look at lab results, and compared to that, like that Western model. So there are, in the US at least, there's a handful of companies that, Quest Diagnostics, LabCorp, where you can go in, you can get your blood drawn. But I don't know, when's the last time you've been feeling fantastic, and gone to the doctor and said, I just want to do a random blood draw? Like, never. You are typically, right?
Yeah.
You typically don't feel well. You go to the doctor, they decide to run labs. Well, what these lab companies are doing in creating these lab ranges, let's say for TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, it's a very common lab run, especially on women, but all people. And there'll be a functional range, and that functional range can go all the way up, from like, 1 to 6 or 7 or 8, something like that. Or I'm sorry, the clinical range can be like, is very broad. And so, and whereas the functional range that we look at is, okay, what's optimal? So instead of telling you that clinical range is a statistical average of all of the people that don't feel well in the United States, and then we say, what's the statistical average? And then that's the range. Well, that doesn't really tell you what's optimal. And so I don't want to be compared to the average American, which is very unhealthy, right? We take a look at 70% of the US population is overweight or morbidly obese. We've got diabetes, heart disease. I mean, all sorts of like, major things happening to the US population. I don't want to compare myself to like the average Joe. I want to compare myself to, a woman my age that is, firing kind of on all cylinders. So and the reason that this is important, Kathleen, is because oftentimes my clients go to their doctors. My clients on average see 12 doctors before they get to me. And those doctors run labs and they say, everything is in range. Everything looks normal. And the reality is nothing about that range, especially the tail end of the range, is optimal, right? It's just a statistical average. So oftentimes my clients are not being listened to. They have all sorts of symptoms, but their doctor is saying, nope, it looks good here, nothing to see here. So that's why that question is so very, very important.
And the other thing I would add to that, and please comment, is that if you're looking at various different readings, so not just the thyroid, but you're looking at different hormone levels, and although conventional medicine may say, oh yeah, you're still within the normal range, but if you're high normal in one, you're low normal in another, to you that might tell you a different story altogether.
Yes. Right? So that kind of example that I gave of in a functional sense, we look at the tree, we look at the trunk, we look at the branches, we look at the leaves, we look at the soil, we look at the roots. So I would say the biggest difference between functional medicine and allopathic Western medicine is that we look at the body as a whole. The body doesn't just work independently in systems. And that's how, you go to your gynecologist or your cardiologist or your orthopedic surgeon. And that's just not how the human body works. The human body works in this like brilliant, beautiful, self-healing, cohesive system. And so yes, I'm using these labs to paint a picture of what's happening in the body. So I also look at blood chemistry and all of these different labs, and I'm not using those labs to say, oh, yep, you have a hypothyroid, or you have a hyperthyroid, or you have an autoimmune disease. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't diagnose or treat diseases specifically. But 90 to 95% of all diseases are environmental. Only about 5 to 10% of disease is genetic. And even if you have a genetic predisposition for hypothyroidism or rheumatoid arthritis, the genetics kind of loads the gun, but it's your environment that pulls the trigger. And so it's really important to see what is going on, with the entire body. Thyroid hormones are metabolized in the liver. If you weren't converting, if you're not converting your thyroid hormones, I'm going to, and you've got really low, TSH and T3 and T4 and free T3, free T4 metrics. I'm going to also look at what's happening with liver markers. Does the liver need some support? So we're constantly trying to see the whole picture. Again, we're not going to take a leaf, spray paint it green, and stick it back on the tree with some Elmer's glue.
Absolutely.
Oh, very good. Good. So you've really answered what I was going to ask you, which was why you focus on analyses instead of symptoms. You've answered that very well. But when you talk about statistical averages, they are very dangerous. It reminds me, Kathleen's heard this one, you may not, of the case of 6-foot statisticians drowning in a river with an average depth of 4 feet, right? So, sorry about that. But it's true, statistic averages can be totally misleading. But
totally. And your question around analysis versus symptoms, I would say they are both very, very important.
Sure.
Because as I said, on average, my clients have seen 12 doctors before they have come to me. And the doctors, if the doctors, are focusing on, the lab ranges. So they're also focused on kind of an analysis, right? But there's symptoms that are associated with it. So let's take thyroid, for example. If you have a hypothyroid, oftentimes there's hair loss. You're very tired, lethargic. You may have a hard time sleeping. You may have dry skin. Like there's all sorts of things that are impacted, when you have an underperforming thyroid. And so there's no such thing as normal insomnia. There's no such thing as like normal, where it's like all of a sudden, like all of your hair is falling out of your head. That's not normal.
No.
And so I think it's very important to have the symptoms kind of guide the way, but then we can look and kind of, I'm a bit of a health detective. I use these clinical tools to be able to analyze, well, why do the symptoms exist? And then also, how do we create a tailored plan, something that is specifically for you to reverse those symptoms? So symptoms are very important. I think they're kind of the other side of a coin.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So that raises another, sorry, quick one, Kathleen, another one. Do you find that within, consider the normal range, and I know with all the limitations of it being an average, but do some people function perfectly healthily at a higher level than others on any of those or many of those given tests?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
There's a range, and that's also why we look at multiple markers and multiple labs so that we can get a picture of health. I mean, your metabolism is as unique as your fingerprint. There
Sure.
isn't another one that's like it out there in the world. And so, these cookie cutter, one size fit all solutions for health and wellness simply don't work for most people, especially if you get to be a little bit older, you have a little more life under your belt, you've weathered a couple of storms through throughout your days. You have maybe a little bit less vital reserve than if you were, 21 years old. I mean, if I told you how I was living my life when I was 21 years old, I mean, it literally like makes my ears bleed sometimes, where I'm like, wow, I was eating and drinking and not sleeping and all of the things. And so when you get a little bit older and you have kind of this shampoo residual effect of all of the decisions that you've made up until that point, you need a little bit more support.
Right.
Right. I think she's talking about me, Kathleen.
I'm talking about all of us.
There you go. See? So Maja, often when a person is out of balance physically, those imbalances have an impact on other areas of their life. Can you elaborate on that?
I mean, I think it was Warren Buffett that used the analogy that you get, what if you only got one car in your life? How would you drive that car? How would you take care of the car? What kind of gas would you put in that car, right? I went to university in Omaha, Nebraska at Creighton University, and that's where good old Mr. Buffett lives. And so I'm familiar with a lot of his, his books and works and all that stuff. And I just think it's such a wonderful analogy. You have one body in this lifetime. And it's literally your vehicle for the rest of your life. And so if you have this car and it's the only car that you have, and you're trying to, drive from Omaha to Austin, Texas with a flat tire, no spark plugs, you're just not going to get very far. And so I know that you all tailor to entrepreneurs, and I feel like there is this no pain, no gain, hustle and grind at all costs mentality that's out there. And the reality is it doesn't work. It is short-lived. Long-term, eventually you are unable to continue. And if you don't make time for your wellness, your body will ensure that you make time for your sickness. And it is significantly easier to simply put in some systems in your life that allow you to get more miles on the tires before they blow, versus making time for chemo or a heart operation, right? Or a stroke, or all of these things that are really on the rise.
Right. And oftentimes people are, I don't know, we've been conditioned to think that if we're functioning somewhat well on a day-to-day basis and we think we're healthy, but in reality, we're far from it.
I think there's a glorification of I'm busy, I'm stressed out, I don't sleep, no pain, no gain. And these are just not winning belief structures and frameworks. They don't win long-term.
That's right. So, Maja, we see from people we have on the show from general reading observations, we see there seems to be a huge increase in the number of people experiencing burnout in their careers, or if they're entrepreneurs in their business journey. And it seems to have got worse, I think, over the last 3 years, or more people are becoming aware of it over the 3 years, where a lot of people suddenly were removed from the stress of the workplace. What do you think the main reason for that is?
So stress is the number 6 cause of death in the United States. I don't know what
Is
it
it
is in
really?
Canada.
Probably similar.
So and most people think that stress is, I had a bad day at work, or my partner was being a jerk. And that's just simply too narrow of a definition of stress. Stress, I like to kind of have 3 stress buckets. There's physical stress. I got into a car accident. I have a traumatic brain injury. I broke my leg. So those are physical stressors. The second kind of stress is a biochemical bucket. So drinking alcohol, not getting enough sleep, over-the-counter drugs, antibiotics, those kinds of things, eating foods that are inflammatory. That's kind of the biochemical bucket. And then there's the emotional stressors, that third bucket, partners being a jerk, stressful day at work. Regardless, the body does not differentiate between those kinds of stressors. So your body has the autonomic nervous system, which is your sympathetic nervous system, and your parasympathetic nervous system. You've probably heard fight or flight, or rest and digest. And what ends up happening in fight or flight is that your body perceives stress. Back in the day, that would have been a saber-toothed tiger, right? I see a saber-toothed tiger. I need to get away from the saber-toothed tiger. So simultaneously, within milliseconds, 2 things happen. Anything that's needed for short-term survival, blood to the big muscle movers, increased respiration, being able to think and see more clearly, all of those things are enhanced through cortisol. So cortisol is being essentially produced in the adrenals, and all of those things for short-term survival are enhanced. Well, the body is always in balance. So if something is enhanced, it means something else is depressed. Your digestion is depressed, which is often when you get very scared, right? You evacuate your bowels and your bladder. Reproduction is depressed. DNA repair, RNA repair, all of these things that are necessary for long-term survival are suppressed, because the body doesn't care if we can fight the cancer cells if the saber-toothed tiger is about to eat us, right?
Yep.
Well, today we have more of those stressors. And again, now we're working with a more broad definition of stress. The environment is significantly more unhealthy. They just did a analysis of baby blood cords, baby umbilical cord blood.
Oh, yeah.
And it was something like there was over 200 chemicals. These are babies that were just born, right? There's like forever chemicals, glyphosate, which is used on Roundup. It's used on crops. It's a carcinogen per the World Health Organization. So we have a significantly more unhealthy just environment, right? So our baseline toxic load is higher than our grandparents, right? And so there's environmental reasons that, why, because that leads to burnout. It's not simply just emotional stress. And then I think that at least in the US, right? The US is kind of the great American dream and hustle mentality. And we have really glorified, in relation to, I think, other countries like Europe, where you're on holiday for the entire, in a month or 6 weeks out of the summer. So I think there's also some kind of belief structures around what is glorified. And let's not, skip over the fact that there was a global pandemic where people lost their jobs and realized that they didn't really like their husband anymore. And I mean, there's so much that is happening. So I think that it's a combination of things of
Okay.
our environment is more toxic. So our baseline stressors and kind of toxic load is higher.
Mhm.
And a lot of it is how you choose to live your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's intentional.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And you sorry, you can throw on top of that
Mhm.
people by and large don't get anywhere near the amount of exercise that their grandparents did, and they eat more fast food than their grandparents did, right? So there's another two that aggravate it.
90, if you go to the grocery store, 99% of all of the food in the grocery store has high fructose corn syrup in it,
Mhm.
which, by the way, is a literal poison. So, and high fructose corn syrup is incredibly inflammatory for the body. So the way that we are eating is very different. To your point, the way that we move our body is very different. There are some tools that I use, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but both those, food and movement are two of the tools that I use in order to reverse these, gnarly symptoms that my clients have. So yes, all of those things are really important. You're spot on.
yes. So once you've been able to determine clinically what imbalances are existing in someone, how do you go about designing a program that your clients that are able to address these issues in your client? Like how do you go about that?
Such a good question. So I think the most important thing to understand is that humans are driven by two things. We seek pleasure and we avoid pain. It's literally what has perpetuated the human race.
Mhm.
And it's very important. I could create the most complicated program in the world, and it could be clinically the right thing to do, but it could be very painful with very little pleasure, which means the adherence to said protocol is going to be 5%.
Right.
So the reality is that we need to keep things simple and we need to start slow. So with my private clients, I do essentially I work on 3 or 4 things, about one thing per week and a half. That really is like low hanging fruit. And this is the baseline where if we don't nail these handful of things, no amount of labs or supplements or very specific ways of eating are going to make a difference because they are non-negotiable. And so it's kind of, okay, who is the human that's sitting in front of me? What constraints do they have? Are they a mom? Are they an entrepreneur? Do they travel a lot? And I just take a look at the whole human that's in front of me. And I've been doing this for, close to 10 years now. And I'm able to kind of stair step one thing at a time. We're not changing our diet and a workout routine and adding supplements in and. We're literally changing one thing. So the first thing I do with all of my private clients in the first week is I change their breakfast. That in and of itself is like mind-blowing for most people, because I give them a 15-minute hack. I said, give me 15 minutes. I'll show you how to make breakfast, the right breakfast, for your entire week. So all of a sudden, at the next 2-week call, my clients are like, man, I lost 7 pounds in like 2 weeks just from changing my breakfast. We don't need to overcomplicate things. And we also need to do the right thing at the right time in the right order. So if I don't do a couple of very key kind of low-hanging fruit, items, nothing else is going to really be successful because I'm building on a foundation of quicksand instead of bedrock.
Okay,
Right.
you piqued my interest. You've changed someone's breakfast. Can you give us an example?
Of course. So I know that intermittent fasting is all the rage right now. For the most part, all of the research on intermittent fasting was done on white men. And women, newsflash, are different than men. We have different biologies. We have different hormonal structure. We have different chromosomes. I mean, there's a whole physiological, biological
Sure.
difference between men and women, right? And so, so intermittent fasting is great if you do it following hormonal cycles for women, and if you are in a healthy place. Most of the women that I work with are in a state of adrenal dysfunction. They're in a constant state of fight or flight. Their body is already saying, oh, we better prepare for a famine. There's constant stress. Store all the fat around the belly, which is probably very familiar to a lot of the women and men that are listening, where it's like, why do I have all this belly fat? It's literally your body saying something crazy is happening. I'm probably not going to be fed. I need to increase my fat storage. So when you are in a state of HPA axis dysfunction or adrenal dysfunction, a state of stress, you need 20 for most women, 20 to 30 grams of protein within 30 to 45 minutes of waking up. And that helps kind of stimulate your metabolism. So I give my clients 2 breakfasts. One is a smoothie that's formulated with the right kind of protein. I mean, how many times have you like struggled around, like, do I do a plant protein powder? Do I do collagen? Do I do whey? Like, I just tell them, this is the best protein powder to use. These are the ingredients. Here's your 15-minute, and it's high carb. I'm sorry, it's high protein, lower carb, not non-existent carb, but lower carb in the morning. And then I also do like a chia pudding, which again, both of these breakfasts have, 20 to 30 grams of protein in it. If it's low glycemic, you can eat one on the run if you're like a mom, because a lot of times people are like, I don't have time for breakfast. And yes, you do. You're going to take it with you on the go. Right. And so that's the very first thing that I do with all of my clients, which is we need to fuel your body. We need to make sure that we are regulating blood sugar. We're kind of kicking on the engines. So those are the 2 breakfasts that I kind of give them an option, and both of them can be prepped for the entire week. It takes a handful of minutes, and you are good to go.
Wow. Oh, wow. Well, that makes a lot of sense as to why intermittent fasting doesn't work for a lot of people, doesn't it? If you don't get that protein in the morning, and your body's saying, I've got to eat more when I can. So,
yeah.
wow.
And so if you are, with women, especially with women, you need to fast like a girl. You can't fast like a man because we are different biologically.
Sure.
So I feel like, oftentimes, and when you are kind of in the state of HPA axis dysfunction, most of my clients are like, I'm not even hungry until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they were told like, oh, that's intermittent fasting and that's good for you. And it's like, that might be good for some people, but it is not good for you if you are in this state of metabolic chaos, which I mean, they say only about 10% of the US population is metabolically healthy.
Right.
Really? Wow.
What do you think of eggs as protein in the morning?
If it's not inflammatory for you, then I think it's great. I think that the American Heart Association did a number on the US population by saying that you need to eat low cholesterol foods. An egg, eggs tend to be one of the higher allergen foods, but I like to say is why. Why is a normal human allergic? Like, why are allergies such a thing right now? And it goes back to metabolic health. So I love eggs. I think it's like a perfect superfood. I mean, it's going to turn into, a grown chicken. I mean, so I love eggs. There may be some things that we need to do in order to make eggs tolerable for you eventually. And that has to do with gut dysbiosis and the microbiome. But for most people, I think eggs are a fantastic source of protein.
Right.
And fat.
Excellent. Wow. So, very quick observation, more than a question. I lived most of my life in Africa. That's why I talk a bit funny. And I met many Black Africans who live pretty bad lives from a diet and environment point of view compared to what we consider healthy, right? Very restricted diet, living in pretty poor housing, but not exposed to chemicals, pesticides, and all that. And very few get allergies, very few have heart attacks, and very few suffer from stress. So I think it's an interest. And they walk from the time when they're little kids walking 3 or 4 miles a day to school. All their lives they walk, right? And I think it's quite interesting that with all our science and medical health, many of them are healthier than we are when they reach their 70s and 80s.
I mean,
Just a
I think that this is you bring up a great point. And so if we take a look at, a particular set of diseases or disorders since 1990, ADHD has increased over 800%.
yeah,
Alzheimer's disease has increased almost 300%.
Oh,
Autism has increased over 2000%.
1,000%. Yeah,
Bipolar disease in youth has increased over 10,000%. Celiac disease over
yeah,
1,000%. I could go on and on.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what is happening from 1990 to 2023? So we're looking at 30 years.
That's right.
What is going on? Genetics do not change. Genetics take thousands of years to
That's
change.
right.
So
Generations.
we
Yeah.
know it's environmental. We know that when you change in an environment, you change your health diagnosis.
Mhm.
hmm.
Mhm. Wow. Wow. And all that list you mentioned, until I moved to Canada 20 years ago, I'd hardly ever heard of any of those. Right? People got hay fever a couple of times a year when the grass or the pollen. That was it. Very few were allergic to bees. Never heard of anyone allergic to peanuts before I came here.
Everybody is allergic to peanuts now. I just gave birth to my first son 4 months ago, and
Congratulations.
thanks. And I'm like, this is so much so on my radar. Like, why are we diagnosing kids? The CDC says that 1 in 34 children now are on spectrum. They're autistic. In the 1970s, it was 1 in 10,000.
That's
So
right.
what that HE double hockey sticks has happened in the environment to make, and they say that it's not because we're diagnosing better. Because a lot of people say, oh, we're better at diagnosing. And it's like, if you see somebody that's on spectrum, it's pretty obvious, right? It's
Mhm.
pretty hard to miss. So anyway, it's a lot of it is environmental. And unfortunately, in the United States, we have atrocious regulations around the chemicals that can be in our food, in our water. Polysorbate 80 is in everything, which is one of the main, it crosses over the blood-brain barrier. It's a preservative that's in literally everything. And we know that it causes ADHD in children. So like, what are we doing here? Whereas these things, I think that European Union, I think there's close to 200,000 chemicals that are banned in the EU that are not
Yeah.
banned in the United States.
Right.
So you end up living this defensive lifestyle of being defensive around what food can I eat? What products can I put on my skin? What the air that I'm breathing, the water that I'm drinking. So environment is literally everything.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Wow. We could go on and on for hours, but we're rapidly running out of time. So, very quick one for you. What's in your opinion, Maya, with all your experience dealing with so many people, is there a mindset or a characteristic, a habit that sets apart those people who, without your skills, lead a relatively healthy, well-balanced life? I'm talking nutrition and health, from the average who just don't look after themselves very well. Is there one thing, or is it more complicated?
I think it's more complicated. I
Okay.
think that we do what our parents do,
Mm-hmm.
and these belief systems are passed on. It's like when you are born, you're handed a suitcase, and that suitcase is heavier for some people and lighter for others. And these beliefs become our programming. And
Mm-hmm.
so oftentimes for, my female clients, it's this sense of, I'm not as important as everybody else in my life. So I will turn myself inside out for my husband, for my children, for my boss, for my clients. And it's why my program is called the Inside Out Protocol, because we're transforming from the inside out. And we start with kind of analyzing and dissecting what is the programming, AKA the belief structure that you have around health and wellness. Because a lot of people are, everybody wants to know, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? What do I need to do? And I'm like, who do you need to be in order to do the things that you need to do in order to get where you want to go? Most people know they need to move their bodies, get sunshine, eat healthy, not drink, a boatload of beer. Like most people know what to do, but they have a hard time in that instant moment where they have a choice to keep their promises and agreements to themselves. They choose to say F it, throw caution to the wind, and they eat the thing or skip the workout or, whatever it is. So I think that it comes from, you hit the nail on the head, which is beliefs and like your identity. Who do you identify as? Well, I don't identify as, I don't identify as a smoker, so I don't smoke cigarettes. I identify as a healthy person. So the behaviors that I'm able to execute on are that of a healthy person. So one of the first things that I do with my clients is I call them identity adjectives. So it's like, what do you want to have? Great. List that out. What do you need to do? The actions that you need to take in order to have those things. Great. List that out. Now give me 5 identity adjectives. Who do you need to be in order to do the things that you need to do in order to have the things that you want to have? And in that moment where I'm about to cruise through the drive-through at McDonald's or wherever, and and let's say one of my identity adjectives is to be consistent with my eating. Right. I would say, is this the behavior of a consistent person? Right. And then, so it's this split second, like pause where we are weaving in new identity adjectives, which is kind of the programming, the software for the hardware.
Right.
Well, wonderful.
That's wonderful. We've actually run out of time, Maja. It's too bad because we could probably keep on chatting here for hours. But how do people contact you?
So the easiest way to get a hold of me is to go to my website, majamiller.com. There's a quick little application you can fill out just so that I know what's going on with you. And then we just hop on a Zoom call and I'll let you know whether or not you're a good fit for what I do. And if it's not a good fit, I probably know somebody that can help. And so I don't gatekeep. I'm pretty accessible, head to my website and set up a call.
Fantastic. Well,
great. Thank you, Maja.
Thank you so much, Maja, for being with us today. And thank you all once again for tuning into our show. If anyone is interested in being a guest on our show, we invite you to visit our website at theyakkingshow.com. All you need to do is click on the contacts tab where you will find a short application form, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.